Okay, so we are going to crack on with our final panel of the day and of the conference, which is on open access communities and activism. First up, we have Ronan Cox and Jim Rogers from Dublin City University.
It's actually Alex. Jim couldn't make it today.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. So Alex, Kouker, and Ronan. Alex and Ronan. Which means I can introduce Ronan with a bio, and Alex, I may have to ask you to introduce yourself. So Ronan has over 10 years of experience in the academic library environment. He was appointed Digital Services Librarian for DCU in January of this year, and is responsible for the management and development of the library's digital platforms, services and ICT integrations. And prior to this, he was faculty librarian for the School of Business for 5 years. Alex?
I'm a colleague of Ronan's, and I'm the Humanities and Social Science librarian at DCU. Oh yeah, Mike. And so basically I order books and do IL sessions with students, and basically, yeah, try and get, students to utilize information effectively and apply that in context, so to speak. So it's, yeah, I'm a librarian basically.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Over to you two.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for having us here as well. Myself and Alex made a very, very early trip over this morning to Dublin to be here, and we're delighted to talk about the Communications Undergraduate Journal and essentially how it helps students to build a set of skills to critically and confidently engage with information sources and scholarly conversation, which essentially will therefore then cultivate information fluency amongst students. So as we progress through the talk as well, we hope that you take from it that the CUJ is very much a collaborative effort involving lots of different people in Dublin City University. And with that in mind, we'd obviously like to thank, first and foremost, the students as authors who submit to the journal, but also to Jim and his colleagues in the School of Communications for the work on the CUJ and their input into these slides as well. Okay, so this is the journal itself, just a snapshot of it. So please feel free to have a look at it if you wish. It's at cumjournal.ie. The main points to note here are obviously that it's a digital open access journal, and it runs on the Janeway platform. And while you see in the screenshot here that we have volume 1, issue 1, we've literally just this week launched volume 2. So that's ready to go right now. So if you were to pop onto the platform, you'd see volume 2 is available at the moment. So we have 2 volumes present at the moment, and obviously the plan is to develop that a lot more in the coming months and years as well. So a bit more detail on the journal itself. It's a course-based undergraduate journal, and I suppose it is worth noting here the word undergraduate. So rather than aimed at postgraduate students, we felt that there is definitely value in DCU about having a journal that incorporates the voice of the undergraduate as well as a scholar, because it's something that we haven't really come across too much in our research. So it's really based on undergraduate level. So essentially it's edited by scholars and it's published by us as librarians. And essentially what it does is it gives these students who are undertaking the VA in communication studies a platform really to publish their exemplary work on an open forum across a broad spectrum of media and communication subjects. But it's also really, it's a teaching and learning tool as well for these students in essentially how to package and how to communicate their work for scholarly publication, for a journal, essentially. So how to repurpose that work into a journal submission. And it also then adds value, I would say, to students that are future students on that course, or students elsewhere that want to see how maybe you would put together a journal submission and what a journal article, a peer-reviewed journal article looks like at undergraduate level. So it definitely has value both internally within DCU, but also externally in the wider world as well. And it's also an experimental playground. And what we mean by that is, it's like everything, it's not set in stone. We have the platform up and running, but it's it will change, it will certainly evolve over time. And even just from being here today, we're furiously scribbling notes earlier on from different ideas that people have presented. And it's great to see that collaboration as well, and something that we certainly engage with the journal as well. And then the other thing is with collaborative space, as you'll see with the workflow slide that we have, it's very much a collaborative opportunity between us and faculty and students, and a safe space for students to present their work in a timely manner. And it's something that we're certainly proud of. Sorry. Okay, so the functions of the journal itself then, and in a nutshell really, we're talking about collaborative learning here and pedagogical facilitation. So what we mean by collaborative learning really is at faculty and librarian level, we all have our own domain knowledge areas, and it's about harnessing that collectively to allow for pedagogical facilitation. So really, us as librarians and the faculty of ECU, we're essentially partners, and we encourage students to engage in the peer review process and the journal process. And that encourages them to develop their critical thinking skills and their own ownership in terms of domain knowledge. But we're also talking about reimagining academic social organisation at the undergraduate level. And I think it's important to say there, we're not trying to disrupt the academic world in its truest sense. It's really just about giving an opportunity to undergraduate students, final year students, to really position themselves as scholars in their own right, and to be proud of the work that they do at that level. And it's really to kind of move faculty from a position where they do obviously work as scholars, but it's really to provide their role as information experts and to facilitate the impartation of that knowledge to the students as well. And also we want to enable the students as creators of information and provide a structure for agency and control over their own work. So again, it's to enable the students to really be confident in their own right and stand over the work that they produce, and to beat their own path, so to speak, in terms of how they gather that information. But to do it in, as I said, in a safe environment, and in an environment where we can contribute to that scholarly conversation as well and help them along. So at this point, I'm going to pass over to Alex to talk a bit more about the information fluency aspect of the CUJ as well.
Great, thanks. So basically, if you take the library lens on this, because Ronan and I being librarians and Jim not being here, so we had to kind of spin this a little bit on this angle, because I certainly utilize this effectively in class interaction. So the idea really is to have something, I suppose you could call it information literacy 2.0, to sort of stretch this up a little bit. The idea is to kind of have this sort of holistic circle, whereby, students have an information need, they locate and look for information, but they also need to evaluate this, right? And then sort of critically use it in an ethical kind of way. So there's different layers, and there's also, I suppose, a technological or computer literacy aspect. So for instance, which is kind of missing quite often still, is things like using a citation manager, like, for instance, RefWorks or, Zotero. So you've got all these things with information fluency, i.e., presentation, participation. So you participate sort of in a collaborative kind of context, but there's also a sense of commitment to this, because people who take part want to take part. They're not being forced into it. The third-year students, they have a sense, I guess, what's going on and what they want for themselves. But also this whole critical thinking aspect as the scholarly workflow from, submitting, the sort of review process, tweaking and adjusting, going back, citing and referencing, is that properly done? The kind of things that librarians work with students on. And then I suppose the whole area of domain knowledge. Okay, so because effectively students, undergrads, any student, you have their own little footprint. So they produce an assignment work, which is a lot of work is put into this, and it's effectively, something's useful is being done with it, and it's used by themselves and students that follow, looking at works by example, right? So, so information fluency says, in a sense, is effectively moving on from the sort of I wouldn't say passive information use, but actually, apply and practice through publishing, what you should learn through the library and in collaboration with colleagues and faculty. So just to drill in a little bit further, so this, this ACRL, Academic Research Library, set up, they've got this information literature framework. There's six facets to this. You can look at them in yourself. They really contain, I suppose, learning objectives and there's examples of classroom activity. So I just picked one, and that is scholarship as a conversation. If you look at this, and this is just really an example, to sort of say, to really apply this in situ as a librarian, you go into class, you work with students, ideas are created, debated, and weighted against one another. That's great, and then what do you do? How do you make this interactive? So you could use printed this, but my hand is a bit tight. So basically, you take a piece from this journal, an article that is published, and you read and analyze this maybe in pairs, okay, and you get people to review this critically, and the classroom activity, they take this article, and as it so happens, we publish one sort of dissertation style work in there as well, which is kind of reworked in article format. So they go in there and look at the methodology section, they look at findings, they look at maybe the discussion chapter and engage with that at their level. I mean, that's something that peer did, it's a final year project, so they can identify with that and learn by example. So this is where we, from an IL perspective, bring the library back into the publishing thing. I guess that's really the library angle in terms of using the journal. So, over to you.
Yeah, so one of the main benefits we found throughout this entire process was the ability to map a journal workflow. And Janeway allows that, obviously. So this is what we have up on the website. And I suppose to say from the outset, again, this isn't set in stone. That's the beauty of it. So this works for us right now. But that's not to say as the journal develops that we don't reconfigure this to suit our needs at that given time. But very quickly, just to run through that. So generally speaking, it's any assignments that have got a first class honours are generally selected for a review process. So the editorial board will look at those and then they'll handpick some of those submissions and then invite the author to formally submit the work to the platform. So once the author submits the work, you move into the editorial review stage in the bottom right hand corner there. And that's where we have various people involved, whether it's the editor, the section editor, the reviewer, and the author. And the value there is that it's this cyclical process whereby there's an ongoing conversation between the reviewer, the author, and section editor until everyone's happy with the content. So there might be a few revisions required depending on the context of the article and the work that's going on. And then it moves over to the editorial board for copy editing. And then the library really steps back into the fold here in terms of the production piece, just to make sure that it adheres to the agreed standards in terms of footnotes, references, abstract keywords, etc. And then the proofing is handed back over to the editorial board. Then it comes back to us for pre-publication, where we turn it into like a PDF or a JATS XML, and then it's finally published. So the benefit to us is we can clearly map each user role and everybody knows where they stand at any given time. And that just simplifies the whole process. But again, this is something that we constantly review as well. But for now, it's something that we certainly find really valuable. And the feedback we've got from students and from the faculty in the School of Communications has been really, really helpful as well in terms of feeding into this process. So I'll pass back to Alex now for a few minutes.
Yeah, basically, and Ronan said this in a way already, like we look at this as a social good and sort of communities of practice, right? There's a bunch of students, not just in the School of Communications, but right across campus. I mean, just to give you an example, and I know I'm kind of out of time, but this is something that happened that I certainly would never imagine. So the editorial of the first issue, well, there's only two, but the first issue is translated into Irish. So I was approached by colleagues in the School of Applied Language and Cultural Studies. We have master's students, they have to set up a translation company, mock company, and they have to, get work. So they submitted, pitched, and so, well, you can translate. So they basically took it upon themselves to translate content from the journal. Now, it only turned out to be the editorial because they controlled the workload, but that was like a side benefit or an add-on that we never expected to happen. It was never our thinking. So we don't really know where this will go, but it's really to kind of build knowledge and expand and see what happens. And also this whole idea on the kind of renewable rather than disposable assignments. So in Simon Fraser, Kevin Stranach, which some of you probably know, I mean, they do student publishing, and they're kind of student-run journals. I suppose mainly our model is slightly different, whereby we have the lecturers involved. But it's really to see, you know, an artifact that lives on and can be reused. So students are quite proud of this, I guess.
Yeah. And also, just to mention there as well, when we talk about renewable, one of the submissions for volume 1 was the dissertation, and that was actually cited by a doctorate of philosophy in Australia. So when you look at that paper on Google Scholar now, you see the citation. So obviously we're delighted with that, but also for an undergraduate student to have that on their CV as part of a professional development framework, or when they're heading into the workplace, it's great to have that ammunition behind you as well and to show that. So we're really proud of that as well.
Yeah.
Challenges.
Yeah, some of the challenges really, I mean, that goes without saying, authenticity, integrity of student work. That's always, the circle square on this, and clarity of roles and responsibilities, who's doing what. There were teething issues, misunderstandings as to, the library does everything, including copy editing. I don't think so. And then the workload. I mean, this is a side job. This is not our main job for everyone involved, and hence also the workflow. We can't really go with open submissions. I mean, how do you manage that? So the idea was to kind of look at really high-end student work, approach them and ask them, would you be happy to put some extra work? And then kind of limit this at maybe 6 or 7 items plus editorial. And again, this, as we said, this is a playground. We don't know where this will maybe go, refining it, but they're the sort of challenges, and we kind of meet every so often, discuss. But yeah, it's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, no, it's just to reiterate that point with Alex. Yeah, there is obviously going to be challenges, but it's something that we can work through in collaboration with the faculty in the school. So again, the final slide there is in terms of what's next for us and for the journal. It's really just to pose the question, because again, we don't have all the answers, and we're still early enough in our journey itself. And it's really about trying to discuss whether a journal of this nature and this approach, whether it can kind of begin to question the status quo of scholarly publishing through information fluency and open pedagogy. So it's beginning to ask that question at undergraduate level as well, and what the value is in terms of that approach to harnessing the knowledge of undergraduates as publishers in their own right, and how we can then build. So for example, we may at some point hopefully expand this into other schools, like the School of Business, for example. So there's definitely options that we can pursue in DCU.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, in terms of the status quo of scholarly publishing, I mean, that's a big phrase, right? But you could say that some of these people will progress to a master's, PhD, and may want to actually become professional academics. If they've been involved early on at undergrad level in doing something like this, certainly I would think would change their thinking on publishing as a process, and maybe that'll create a sense of agency and systemic change, because these people at some point will sit on review panels. They may look at this as something, I've experienced as a junior scholar, so to speak, and I learned an awful lot from that, and I want to change the system. So I think, we think that there's a bigger picture to all of this, apart from the IL, the learning, the writing, etc., etc.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was super interesting. We'll take questions at the end, but next up, without further ado, we have Phillipa Grand, who is press manager at the University of Westminster Press, a quote-unquote new university press established in 2015. Phillipa has been in this role for the last 2 years, having worked in academic publishing for over 20 years at both commercial publishers, your dark evil past, and university presses. She's trying to clean up her act, where she specialised in commissioning titles in social sciences. Over to you, Phillipa.
Thank you. Yes, I'm like an ex-smoker, and so fervently opposed these days to commercial publishing. Anyway, I'm going to talk today actually not about University of Westminster Press, well, sort of a bit, but I'm going to talk about OIPA, which is a new association or community of practice that we launched this year for open institutional publishers based in the UK. And that rather unwieldy term, I thought I'd kind of pick apart a bit. So what is an open institutional publisher? What do we mean by that phrase? So these are the new university presses, the library publishers, the open journal service providers that have begun to be set up within UK institutions over the past decade or so. And we also want to include in that really anyone who is involved in publishing activity within a university department or school or centre or within the library, even if they're just working on one journal, even if it's a very informal setup, no matter how small scale. And we're also keen to include those who are considering setting up publishing activities or in the process of doing so. So you don't necessarily need to have published anything at all, but if you're looking for support as you set up your new activities. So this phrase is really an umbrella term for a kind of whole range of publishing activity that's going on within the university, some of which has been quite long-standing now, and some of which is much newer. So what unites us beyond being based within a university? So obviously a commitment in some form or other to openness and open access publishing, that we're non-profit, community-led, mission-driven, and that we position ourselves as an alternative to commercial publishing, seeking to make a difference, be part of the change in how academic publishing is done. So we had a soft launch of OIPA at the UKSG conference in Glasgow in April this year. And there have been 9 founding presses listed here, along with Graham Stone at JISC, working to develop and launch the association. And we've been meeting together for about a year before that launch to discuss our ideas and what we wanted out of an association. I think you can also see from this slide, if you drill down, that despite those commonalities, this is quite a diverse group of presses, and we're approaching things in very different ways. So we're not mandating a particular approach to open access or a particular setup. Most of us probably are using Diamond OA in some way. Probably all of us are using a combination of models. But our founding members also include Goldsmiths, and they don't use that kind of model at all. They use a green open access model. Most of us are kind of aligned with a single institution, but we also have White Rose University Press, which is an amalgamation of 3 institutions coming together, and the Scottish Universities Press, launched earlier this year, who use a federated model, bringing together 18 libraries. Some of us, like at Westminster, we're born OA, we don't publish anything that's not open access, we've got no non-OA backlist. But others, like University of London Press, have a kind of different kind of profile and have a hybrid model, and they do and will continue to publish non-open access titles. So there's a real mix of business models and a variety of different ways that we're funding activities and different relationships with our home institutions. But I think we would really value those differences in the association and value these different approaches. We don't want to mandate a one-size-fits-all approach, and I think that our diversity of approaches is one of our strengths. So why did we feel the need to set this association up? Why was there the need for something new? There are many other publishing associations and societies, but we found that not all of those who were in scope to join OIPA were eligible to join those existing associations. And we also felt that they didn't really address the specific issues that institutional publishers face. We did feel that we needed something that was specifically focused on the British context, something that, for example, could engage with relevant policy developments in the UK. We felt that our community is one that is growing, and while the previous informal networks that existed between us had worked quite well to a certain extent, we increasingly felt the need for this to be formalised. And in particular, we, having been through the process ourselves, probably saw the need to support those at an early stage of development, those who were just getting going with their publishing activities. Increasingly too, I think some of us saw that in order for this sector to grow and thrive, we needed to come together, and we needed to look at ways to collaborate. And we saw that an organisation like OIPA could provide a forum to enable that to happen. And increasingly, we felt that we needed a collective voice so that we could input into discussions, debates, and raise the profile of the sector too. So what will the association do? Well, the main aim will be to establish a community of practice that will foster collaboration and knowledge sharing and act as a central hub for those activities. We want to share resources and publishing experiences, look at joint training opportunities, explore opportunities for group marketing, so perhaps through joint conference attendance and being able to share those costs, look at joint funding opportunities, relationships with other open access organisations, provide that shared voice that is going to be large enough to be heard and make a difference, and to provide a platform for advocating for the expertise and value of the work of open institutional publishing, and to highlight the work of what we're doing individually and as a sector more broadly. So what have we achieved so far? So in initial meetings, we've established draft terms of reference and membership criteria. We now have a membership form available for those who are interested in joining us. We've formed an interim committee, and that's our committee. And we also felt, alongside the chair, deputy chairs, we felt that we really needed some comms people on that team too. One of our members, the University of London Press, managed to secure some funding for us earlier this year, which was fantastic. And with that money, we were able to work with a designer to help us develop branding and some initial promotional material. So she worked with us on a brand guide and designed our new logo. And we also use that funding to set up a website. So we now have that website's now live at oipauk.org. And you can find the membership form on the website too, actually. We've also set up a Twitter account. We've got about 160 followers now, which is great. We've been doing a lot of work. The founding members have been doing a lot of work in helping to spread the word. So we're presenting at that UKSG conference earlier in the year, but also collectively we've been presenting at various conferences through the year. We've been writing blog posts, and we're working on a comms plan too. Currently, we are working on our initial areas of focus. So what do we want to achieve in the first 12 months and longer term? So I just wanted to say something about these areas of focus and what I personally think they should be. So this isn't yet approved by OIPA, but it's something that, that these are the things that I think we should focus on, and I'll be talking to them about, and how we can use the association for the benefit of its members and beyond. So firstly, open institutional publishers are often very small scale. They're working across a wide range of different publishing functions. Funding and resources are very limited, and economies of scale are just not possible. So I think we need to be looking at how we use this organisation to share more than just resources and knowledge, but how we might share infrastructure, and how that might then help us to mitigate some of the challenges that we face. And I think we need to be thinking about what kind of infrastructure that could be, and I think we need to be quite ambitious about in thinking about that. So could that be staff? Could that be platforms? How far could we take collaboration? I think open institutional publishers also face a dual issue of lack of visibility and knowledge about the kind of publishing we do, combined with negative perceptions sometimes regarding the prestige of these kinds of presses. There can be a perception that we're kind of in-house vanity publishers. So I think coming together with OIPA, we can do a lot to help to raise the profile of open institutional publishing and improve our brand. And I think we need to be thinking about how we can use it to demonstrate the value of what we do and bring more authors and academics on board to this way of publishing. I think we need to be making sure we're going beyond our echo chamber, beyond the early adopters and the OA advocates, and help move the conversation into the mainstream. The founder of Open Humanities Press, David Ortina, has written that ultimately the only real power base of the OA movement is scholars. So I think we need to be proactive in bringing more of them on board to our way of doing things. And this issue, this question of prestige, I think we need to do some work about thinking what that actually means when academics are saying to that, us as a reason for not publishing with a publisher like Westminster, what do they actually mean and how can we counter that? I also think that a role of OIPA should be in being proactive in expanding institutional publishing across universities, and that part of our mission should be ensuring that this can become the rule and not the exception. We've seen university presses in the UK go in and out of fashion, and we've seen corporate acquisition of these publishers in the past. The more that we can establish institutional publishing as a normal, embedded and accepted part of a university's activities, the better for all of us. So University of Westminster Press's reputation and standing, and our resilience and sustainability, I think, can only be enhanced by there being more institutional publishing, not less. I also think that the conversation around equality, diversity and inclusion in publishing is tending to be dominated by the commercial sector at the moment. They've got the time and resources to pay attention to it, but it needs to be something that we look at too. So of course, the diamond fee-free model there's a clear case to be made that that approach is more equitable, and therefore by default, those publishers using it offer a more ethical approach to OA. And we need to be, Martin, Eve alluded to this earlier, we need to be making the case that not all OA is the same and that there is a choice to be made in which version that you use as a scholar. But we also need to be making sure that inclusive publishing practices in terms of who we're signing and what we publish as part of our discussion too. This session uses the word activism in its title, and I thought that was a really choice of word, and that's not something I've seen used much in my time in this community or amongst institutional publishers. But I think it's a word and a stance that we should really embrace. And I think at OIPA and in the wider community, we should start to see ourselves as activists in that way. We are already united by wanting to bring about change. We agree that the current system isn't fit for purpose and that in fact it is damaging to the institutions that we as institutional publishers serve and to scholarship more widely. So there's obviously already a movement there. And I think OIPA can help the kind of publisher I work for to provide a platform for more activism. And that can then help us go beyond our echo chamber and help us bring more stakeholders on board and bring about the changes that we need. As I was discussing with Caroline yesterday, our moral high ground is something we really need to be making a much more bigger deal about, I think. So I think we would serve our cause very well if we started to see ourselves as activists and behave that way. So that's all from me, and just here are some ways to get in touch with us if you want to find out more. Thank you.
Do all the speakers come back up when we have some?
Still got Sharla.
Oh, of course we have. Sorry. I've got to be and I did have to run out. So next up, everybody, we are really pleased to introduce our final speaker of the day, Sharla Lair. Sharla, if you're ready to unmute yourself. Sharla is the Senior Strategist of Open Access and Scholarly Communication Initiatives at Lyrasis. Sharla's curiosity about what dynamics might advance open science drives her passions for community building, sustainable funding, infrastructures, diamond open access, capacity building, collective impact models, and finding measures of meaningful impact.
Okay,
So, hello everybody. I'm really excited to talk to you about the Lyrasis Open Access Community Investment Program, or OACIP, a funding infrastructure to sustain diamond open access journals based in the United States. There are two studies that provided the impetus for OACIP. The recent OA Diamond Journal study performed by Coalition S in Science Europe reveals that there are many OA Diamond journals in the world that represent a decent portion of all scholarly articles published. However, they are largely dependent on volunteer labor, relatively small. The fact that few OA Diamond journals belong to large publishers means that there is less bargaining power for funding, fewer resources for marketing, and thus lower visibility of the OA Diamond sector as a whole. Overall, the survey indicated that sustainable funding beyond in-kind contributions must be considered vital to ensure a strong and healthy OA Diamond journal ecosystem. The second study was a recent IMLS-funded report, OA in the Open. In it, they noted the open content landscape is massive and unwieldy. Librarians at large universities, even those with dedicated scholarly communication librarians, were as likely to cite being overwhelmed and underinformed about open access as were those of smaller staffed institutions. So if OA Diamond journals needed more sustainable funding, but libraries were already overwhelmed, then there was a need for a stronger, more effective connection infrastructure to connect the library community with the OA Diamond Journal community. After discussion with several people seeking a similar solution, a vision for a community-driven model emerged, and a minimum lovable product was created to develop a way to help match libraries and other prospective investors with nonprofit publishers and journal editorial boards that are seeking financial investments to sustain or transition to open access publishing. Near the end of 2020, Lyrasis launched OACIP to provide a hub for Diamond OA content published by university presses, library publishers, and nonprofit independent publishers such as societies or scholar-led initiatives. Let's look under the hood a bit. The OACIP criteria form, based on a form created by the STAR team at the University of California, is completed by each participating journal, but also their finances and their sustainability plans, measures of impact, how they are organized and governed, as well as how well they are adhering to current standards, best practices, and complying with policies. The idea here is to tell a story about who they are now, and if they are more sustainably funded, who they could be. The form also enables investors to make principled spending decisions and strategically fund programs that align with their missions. Investments in OACIP support costs of labor, infrastructure, contingency, and innovation of each participating journal, and do so through 5-year commitments, allowing the journals to focus on publishing rather than continually trying to find money to keep the lights on. I work with each of the journals to determine their 5-year funding goal. Sustainability is a key principle at Lyrasis. We strongly encourage that a journal add at least 15% to their goal to start building a sustainability fund, especially if we're working with a publisher or editorial board running a single journal. Having enough is not just about covering costs. Sustainability is about redefining enough to also include funds and savings to account for unexpected expenses and inflation and set you up for resiliency. For investors, we developed a standardized tiered pricing structure that is inclusive of many types of investors. One of my goals for this program is that libraries of all types and sizes, as well as library consortia, academic departments, research centers, funding agencies, and even museums will show up to support this program. The price points for the investor can vary based on the journal's funding goal. The less you ask from each investor, the larger the funding community you need to grow to meet the goal. So there's a sweet spot where the pricing is sustainable and where enough investors show up. Note that the amounts are recommended. Participants have given less and more than the tier recommendations that they are assigned. Investors make a 5-year commitment to fund individual journals or fund the entire OACIP portfolio through the OACIP General Fund. They can pay the 5-year commitments upfront or annually. This flexibility enables an array of communities to share the costs of funding these journals at rates lower than the average APC. Despite this not being licensed content, some institutions still require documentation in order to participate. So to help normalize the acquisition of open access content, we developed a simple 2-page participation agreement for the program. The OACIP participation agreement has been quite effective and was even incorporated as one of the model licenses in the toolkit to foster open access agreements commissioned by the ALPSP and Coalition S. During the first campaign, we were building the plane as we flew. While creating the criteria form, the pricing model, the participation agreement, we also needed to find journals that would be willing to participate in our pilot. Luckily, Catherine Mitchell from eScholarship was involved in some of the early discussions. Catherine bravely encouraged the journal Combinatorial Theory to participate in OACIP, and I am eternally grateful to her for taking the risk. The second journal, Environmental Humanities, was published by Duke University Press. They have been partners with Lyrasis for many years. I learned that they were struggling to find new sponsors for this OA Diamond Journal, and I asked, have you ever considered asking libraries to support it? And they replied, why would we do that? That conversation launched their OACIP journey. We launched the first campaign in late fall of 2020, and by the end of the following July, 27 institutions from 3 countries showed up to fully fund these 2 journals for 5 years, and one of them was a museum. In the second year, 3 more journals showed up. They completed the criteria form and were accepted into the second campaign. In this OACIP journal cohort, I was excited to learn that algebraic combinatorics was hosted on OJS, history of media studies was hosted on PubPub, and JLSC was hosted on Janeway. This provided us an opportunity to talk about how investing in OA Diamond journals also often means investing in the open infrastructure upon which they disseminate their journal. Participation included 39 institutions from 3 countries, including 2 library consortia. Again, the funding goal was reached for each of the journals. And now to the present. For this year's campaign, we were more ambitious. 6 journals showed up, and after reviewing their criteria form responses, we decided to accept all 6 despite the much higher funding ask. This was partly because of the opportunities each journal provided to test the effectiveness of OACIP in new ways. Not only had 1 society, but 3 showed up. 2 non-US based journals are represented, one from the UK and one from India. We also had a journal that was not only transitioning to open access, but transitioning from print to open access. The other reason we decided to accept all 6 journals was because we won't know if OACIP can scale unless, well, we try to scale. The 5-year funding goal for the previous 2 cohorts was less than $300,000 US. This year's aggregate 5-year goal is over $1.2 million. Thus far, 62 participants, including libraries, consortia, academic departments, and a national research center from 5 countries, have committed over $800,000. Cultural anthropology has been fully funded, but the other 5 journals still need support. The deadline to participate is the end of the calendar year, and if you would like to know how to support this program or how to help spread the word about OACIP, please reach out. OACIP has come far in a very short period. Since OACIP launched, 75 organizations have made 251 contributions to either a journal or the OACIP General Fund. Several organizations support more than 1 journal. These 75 organizations include 3 academic departments, 4 consortia representing 104 institutions, 66 individual libraries, a national research center, and a museum. In total, the OACIP funding community is made up of 175 individual organizations. One of the biggest surprises for me has been the international reach. OACIP supporters now have expanded into 5 countries outside of the US. In total, the emerging OACIP community has committed over $1.35 million to support these 11 journals for 5 years, and my hope is that this will grow to $1.75 million by the end of this year. I've learned a lot on this short OACIP journey, but there are 2 key things I have learned that I want to share with you. First, it takes a lot of work to administer OACIP. My enthusiasm when I talk about it might mistakenly be interpreted as this is easy, anyone can do it. I'm likely preaching to the choir here though. Open Library of Humanities and Janeway, or insert any other open related program, will likely say the same. Just because you build a principle and mission driven program does not mean that institutions will flock to support it, even when some of them help you build it. Scholarly communication has become a spectator sport for too many, and we relegate our dreams of open science to some distant, far-off utopia where all publishing is academic-owned, corporate publishers have gone bankrupt, and we exist in an open science-saturated world. I fall into this bad habit as well, spending a lot of time talking about what ifs. Dreams are important. It is our dreams that drive much of the work that we do. But by keeping these dreams in our heads or our Twitter feeds and not making them real, not intentionally mapping out each tangible step to reach our goals, and then persistently and consistently following through on each of those steps, nothing changes and the status quo reigns. The biggest threat to the world we are trying to create is not Elsevier or APCs or impact factors. The biggest threat is us. Many of us in this space are idealists, but also skeptics. These opposing qualities cause us to stay in one place, preserving the status quo. But we have to feel like we're doing something, and so we talk. By only talking, presenting, tweeting about what we believe the world should look like, we are convincing ourselves that we are acting, while your Elseviers and the like are putting tremendous resources toward real action toward their goals. Talking is not action. Change is difficult if you want to help people, organizations, institutions change their behavior through your initiative. I have learned that you have to help them imagine new possibilities, to want to behave differently, and then give them actionable steps that they can take, making it as easy as possible for them to do so. In other words, meet people where they are, enable and empower them to go where they want to be. And how do you scale that? This question leads to the other thing I have found on this journey. Yesterday, Jason Coleman, hi Jason, mentioned a program at Lyrasis that helps open source communities to develop sustainability strategies called It Takes a Village. It's a wonderful program that has proven to be effective because it starts from the premise that we are already part of a village. You don't have to build one. We just need to recognize who is in our village, the stakeholders, and engage with them to co-create shared strategies for sustaining the program this village is forming around. But what if you're starting something new where there is no village yet? I walked into OACIP recognizing that part of my task would be to build a community. I quickly learned that building OACIP was not enough to inspire growth of a community. Yeah, there are those libraries out there that are the early adopters, angel investors of OA, as if it were that, and they showed up right away. But that's like 5-10 libraries. Lyrasis has the infrastructure to reach thousands of institutions, but blasting out information on listservs and newsletters didn't help much. I started presenting, publishing, and learned that it's a great way to get people from awareness to enthusiasm, but enthusiasm does not usually lead to action. Then I realized that the way that things are connected tells us more than the things themselves. It is our relationships to your OACIPs, your OLHs, your Janeways, where the magic lives. It is not in the things themselves. And so, instead of thinking about building a village, I wanted to interconnect many villages, to empower each village to build their own community around OACIP. So I asked the editorial boards of the journals to reach out to their own scholar communities, academic departments, and institutional libraries to ask for support for the journal. I gave them template emails, and they did it. And not only libraries, but academic departments from several disciplines and even a research center showed up. Some libraries even worked in cooperation with a local academic department to provide a match and support. This worked so well that I took the same steps to inspire word-of-mouth marketing among the library community. I created an OACIP catalog, as well as wrote a letter that libraries could share with academic departments and research centers on campus, but also with peer institutions. This resulted in a number of liberal arts institutions showing up to participate. This is the OACIP community as of today. The idea of a global federated network of OACIPs and OLHs and DMOSs, like what Johan spoke about yesterday, is at the forefront of my mind. And I'm actively taking steps to connect with similar programs around the world to figure out how we might organize. This is no easy task. However, I'm not so sure it's as difficult as we might think. If we want to have a global project, we will need to connect globally and make these connections visible. This requires active and intentional connection building that is flexible, inclusive, and equitable. A global network is not a new paradigm in scholarly communication. Large commercial, corporate content and infrastructure providers have a global community that already supports them. The global infrastructure to work collaboratively exists because we are the infrastructure. We cannot feel this sense of community with these large corporate entities because we are by design made to participate in silos and not empowered to work collectively. Once we realize that we, all of us here, are the infrastructure, and we choose to connect with all stakeholders at all scales with intentional and strategic action, not just talk, then I believe a global collaboration of our many villages is possible. I'm very excited to talk to you all. You are my people. You are the doers and the action makers. Thank you for your time.
Sorry, Sharla, I wasn't able to turn on the mic quickly enough. We whooped, we cheered, and we applauded you extremely loudly in the room. I've just asked if the other speakers would mind coming to sit at the front again, and then we can all have a quick discussion before we finish up. Okay, first question. Yeah, one from Catherine.
So my question is for the presentation about undergraduates. So I'm used to some of the publishing activities you describe in terms of PhD level students. So that's kind of the apprenticeship model where the candidate is publishing and reviewing because they're trying to practice being an academic. And that's because it's assumed that that's what they're there for. That's what they ultimately want. And I was wondering, is that how you frame it for undergraduates, or do you frame it very differently? How do they understand that process and what they're trying to get out of it?
Question. So Mike.
Sorry,
yeah.
there is.
Yeah, and that's a great question. Like I would say, PhDs are probably one step removed from being full academics, whereas with undergraduates, perhaps they may move into a master's, or they may move into the workforce. So I guess from my perspective, it's really about framing it for them in terms of the value of information and the value of the content that they create, and the fact that it doesn't always exist in a vacuum, in terms of moving away from the throwaway assignments, in that what they create can have a value outside of university, if you so wish, and then to harness their efforts in that respect. So I suppose from my perspective, it's really about the psychology of the student and what they want from the academic experience. So you'll always have students that are very, very intrinsically motivated, and they just want to do well, and they want to create output that has value for them, but also for others. And that's a way for the journal to facilitate that. So that would be my view on it, I guess. I don't know if you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I would look at this as really very much a teaching tool. It's an implement you can use, you can point to, you can utilize in a classroom setting. But it's also like to lead by example for students at second year or even first years looking what a third year piece looks like. I mean, we get students into library looking for good examples of good quality work, and that's difficult. I mean, NIR typically, archives research MAs and PhDs. You wouldn't really see undergrad, say, final year projects. And these are assignments, so they're kind of leveled up. And so you lead by example, and as the writing center is involved, we can look at citing referencing, so it's using technology to kind of be more efficient in your writing. And so this is only the second issue, but we want to turn this into a teaching and learning event as well. So it'll be like a showcase and teaching. And so the library drops in 15 minutes talking about like the information environment and seek information, and then the writing center comes in, and the students themselves come in and speak to their peers to sort of say, well, I did this and that was the experience. They reflect on that, and that gives a different angle on, students as content creators as opposed to just consumers. I mean, there's a nuance, and to basically evidence that in a fully published piece. I mean, when you look at the journal itself, it doesn't have DOIs. Okay, in terms of indexing, we didn't really do much. We didn't go out there, trying to get in the DOIJ or something. It's just out there in Google Scholar, and when we look at the stats, we already get this traction beyond DCU, and we just don't know where this will lead. And I'm certainly, from my perspective, so that's the School of Communications, but I'm very much thinking of replicating this across other schools I work with, like law and government, politics, And maybe at some point get maybe students to run, like in Simon Fraser and other universities, stuff like student-run, student-led journals that are, they get a helping hand from an academic who basically shadows them and supports them. But again, it's a playground, right? But it's not really for the future scholar. There's a different emphasis. It's very much on the teaching and learning aspect.
Yeah, and just to finish on that point as well, and Alex mentioned in the presentation, students that want to engage will, because there's no extra marks here, no extra credit. So again, it comes down to that motivation piece. What students see as value in information and the output that they create, and making that available to other people to develop further. And we see that in the citation that we got from Google Scholar. And we also have, for every issue, we'll have a launch. So the authors will attend with their family if they want to, and talk about their work. So it has that added value there as well.
Thanks. I love the idea that the authors come with their families to celebrate that. That's really sweet. I've got a question for Phillipa. So interesting hearing more about University of Westminster Press. You guys are the same age as OLH in terms of us as a publisher. So I wondered, where do you see UWP going in the next sort of 3 to 5 years? What are your plans, other than sort of surviving the current neoliberal crisis?
My plans. I mean, I think, we're very small. I'm the only full-time employee at Westminster. I mean, it's really interesting hearing about what you're doing. We're mainly kind of teaching-led. We obviously have an emphasis on research, but teaching is so vital to a university like Westminster. It's not Russell Group. So I do think we need to now start thinking creatively about how we can collaborate with other presses in this space, because we're all, I think Westminster might be the smallest, but it's like 1 or 2 or 1 and 1.5 other people working at some of the other university presses, and we're all doing very similar things, and we're all working with very similar platforms. We've had a lot of conversation about the politics of this today, which has been really fascinating. So maybe the aim isn't to bring down Elsevier, but if we're going to be in any way an alternative, how do we do that? And how do when university presses were set up, they were for their institutions, and back 100 years ago, they were for their institutions, and they were to serve their institution. And that idea has become very kind of old and unfashionable now, and there is this perception that maybe we're just vanity publishers, or we're not as prestigious as the likes of Routledge or whatever. But I'm also doing the day-to-day of running the press. Trying to deal with some of that bigger picture is really hard to spend time on. So I'm really hoping that this OIPA can be a way for us to kind of be more than the sum of our parts. So I suppose I do hope it is in collaboration somehow. It's a very long-winded answer.
Oh, thank you. It's been really great to learn more about OIPA today. Any more questions in the room? I would like to ask Sharla a question, if I may. Sharla, in the response, I'm sorry you didn't quite capture it, but the response in the room to your talk has been phenomenal. The response on our Discord channel, there have been mic drops, people have been cheering. I think your energy, your positivity, your granular experience in the past few years with the OACIP project is something that we can all draw energy and inspiration from. You had a really great phrase when you said that funding open source and open access projects and not-for-profit projects has become something of a spectator sport for too many. Could you share any insights in terms of how you managed to persuade some of these libraries or these other stakeholders, funders and so on, to actually put their money where their mouth is? What is it that you find the most effective in terms of tactics?
I think, honestly, it's all of us talking. You start to see a thread that runs through everything that we're saying. I heard it through this conference. There's real passion behind what we're doing, but it's not just altruistic or just idealistic. We're really just helping real people. You know, and I think the idea being that we're focusing on the scholarly community. However, open access and open science, I think, is expanding that audience to being, you know, our citizen scientists, our the policymakers, all that. We're starting to realize what kind of impact we really could be having by the work that we do. So I think I think the most important thing to know is we can move in big. There, I unmuted myself. But I just want each of us to start talking about what we do, even if it's small, because whenever you collect all these stories together and others hear them, they start to connect the dots. And that's what I'm starting to see among the library community in the United States. They have not had policymakers trying to force them to do anything around like APC agreements. We're not organized that way in the United States. Money doesn't flow that way. So a lot of the non-APC, BPC, non-BPC programs have actually been quite successful here. Building on that, the work that has been done by COPE and by OLH, by Scope 3, even by Knowledge Unlatched, and especially in its early days of educating everyone and realizing what kind of impact there could be, but also with the scholars of what open access can be, with the institutions of what kind of impact can happen out of that, and then with the funders to let them understand where their money flows is that's energy and where that is going. You know, and to take that into consideration as they're trying to transform the scholarly communication landscape. So I come back to the connections, and that you have to meet people where they are, whatever their motivations and incentives are, craft a message around that so that it's translatable to them, and then make it really easy for them to participate. And I've learned a lot of this from working with like OLH, and several people represented in the room there, University of Michigan Press, at the Opening the Future folks, and COPUM. That's what we're all learning. So this isn't new, it's just hard. And I think we keep looking for the silver bullet, pardon the violence of that, but we're looking for just this magic answer. There isn't one. It takes a lot of hard work.
Thank you. Yes, no silver bullet, absolutely. Shad Nelson from CDL, who is here in the room, has typed a question, which I think is worth putting to you, Sharla. He's talking about when universities are paying for the big bundles of journals, they're forced, obviously, to pay for all of those collectively. As in all of the journals collectively. Do you see that it might be possible to fund big bundles of open access journals, and might that appeal to institutions?
I think if we look to libraries trying to support all the scholarly publishing, it will go bankrupt. Yes, libraries are doing the best they can. I think in most cases, those who are aware of open access and interact with it, especially those at the research level, but even smaller ones now that are seeing the value of it at a teaching and learning level, they're trying just to make everything open, and they're doing that through whatever kind of models and infrastructures are being presented to them. And so, you know, the idea that the big deal, and that was created by the libraries, because at the end of the day, just like all of us here, they're working more with less, wearing many hats. They're looking for efficiencies, simplicity, just to be able to do what they're tasked to do every day. And so I think what we need is actually a more transparent view of where all the money is actually going towards scholarship in general, whether it's open or not. And then we need to rebalance that money, because some of that is going towards, you know, shareholders, which, you know, they're legally bound to have that kind of system in place, being for-profit entities. And so, you know, the idea is, do we continue to do that, or can we shift that money over to those who have funding gaps, so that at least we're equitably funding all of the things that are out there, and we could just tell Elsevier, sorry, we don't have enough money because we're, you know, this is all we've got. There needs to be that shift and that rebalance. I don't know if a big deal would actually work in an open environment, just because there are so many different views on what is valued at the local level and how that is measured. And I don't know a good answer for that, but we do need to work collectively so that one entity isn't getting all of the money at the sake of others.
Thank you. Last chance for questions from our online participants. Don't forget, you can just raise your hand on Teams if you'd like to ask a question, or from anyone else in the room. If not, I might call this panel to a close. I'm incredibly grateful to all of our speakers, to Ronan, Alex, Phillipa, and of course to Sharla joining us remotely online. Thank you very much, everybody. So that's the end of the day. Can I ask my OLH colleagues to just come and stand at the front of the room? And then if you like a quick photo of them, you can take a photo of them. But it would be nice for us to close it all together. I think, just come and stand with us. I think I speak for all of us when I say this has been an absolutely brilliant and energising experience. We are so grateful for you guys travelling all the way to London from quite far afield in many cases, for everybody who's joined us online throughout the 2 days. I think the hybrid format has been relatively seamless and as pain-free as it is possible to be. We have 2 announcements to make. We promised that there would be T-shirt prizes. For the prize for zaniest online contribution goes to Hardy Pottinger. Congratulations, Hardy. Comment about chickens. That was completely unforeseen and triggered a lot of pet images yesterday. The prize for the best question, not a comment, actually goes to Sharla, who was our final speaker this afternoon, for her comments, questions to Johan yesterday. So congratulations, Sharla. We will get your details and post those T-shirts out to you next week. So yeah, that's it. I think we've had such a brilliant time. We foolishly feel like we might do this again. It won't be an annual occasion because that's too much work, but possibly a biennial conference, and possibly if others in the room are interested in co-hosting or a roving conference that we could keep the community and the conversation going, I think that would be absolutely brilliant. So let's keep talking about all of that. And the most important thing, for those of us here in London in the room, we're going to be going to the Smugglers Tavern, which is just around the corner, 2 minutes away, and we have a dinner reservation, I think at 6 o'clock, but we'll be there having drinks. So please come and join us there. For those of you online, we will leave the Discord Tavern open. If you would like to go in and chat to one another, please feel free to do so. Any of you who work with us at OLH and Janeway know that we use Discord with all of our colleagues and clients, but it would be great to keep these conversations going, perhaps through the Below the Decks channels as well. So do keep chatting to us. Any last piece of housekeeping I've missed? No? Please, can I have a massive round of applause for these guys? They're absolutely amazing. Working with them is nothing other than a pleasure. So yeah, well done us. Thank you, everybody.